Welcome to Industry Ignited, the podcast that sparks bold conversations with leaders driving innovation in industry, manufacturing, and business strategy. I'm your host, Dr. Leeanne Aguilar. Today I'm joined by Stephen Ward, founder and president of ITech Governance Consulting and author of the upcoming book, Strategy Before Tools. With over 30 years in technology, including 2 decades in financial services, IT, Stephen has made it his mission to help leaders shift from reactive oversight to proactive governance, aligning IT, AI, cybersecurity, and compliance with real business goals. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
I'm excited to have you. So, Stephen, you've spent over 3 decades in technology. What first drew you into IT governance and compliance?
Well, it wasn't intentional. The I actually my original intention in life was to paint. I went to art school and somehow ended up in technology. I was always kind of understood technology and ended up in the tech field. Started out kind of writing database applications and things like that, mostly because of a business that my wife and I once owned that we worked on, and I couldn't find anybody else to do it, so I did it myself. And then I just kind of stayed in it and kept going that way. But I was always more, I guess, attracted to the business side of it than the pure tech side of it. I'm not really a techie person. I was always more interested in what tech could do for business. And that really attracted me. I used to think that I liked to solve puzzles, and I realized eventually I don't really like puzzles. I just like solving problems, and business is about solving problems. When it comes to governance, the one thing that I saw all the time, especially early on, was that there was this big disconnect between the tech world and really what the businesses were needing to accomplish, right? And there was technology is part of operations, and there was this disconnect. I felt that what was happening in technology, what was happening in operations, oftentimes was not clear to the business side of the business leadership to really understand what was going on. So there was this lack of transparency, this lack of sometimes accountability, and this lack of awareness, right? So without awareness, without transparency, and without accountability, technology doesn't really work very well for a lot of people. And that's really what governance is about, is about those 3 things. And that, when you tie that back to, I think, strategy, the pursuit of business objectives, that was more interesting to me in trying to solve those problems than just pure technology by itself.
Yeah, so really about solving problems and identifying areas for
Mhm.
improvement. So you kind of found yourself in an area where you thought you can make a difference, is what I remember.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I really like solving problems. So
Yeah.
that was attractive to me. So doing that with either by my own companies or companies that I was employed by, that became much more interesting,
Yeah.
right? And like I said, what I really found was that operations really had this disconnect
Mm.
between what the business wanted to do and what was really happening in the business.
Yeah. Can you share a turning point in your career where you realized leaders need more strategic guidance than technical tools?
Yeah, I think I've owned several businesses, and when I got into banking, uh, accidentally, um, the yeah, it became really clear to me that what was happening within operations, which technology is part of operations, didn't necessarily align with the objectives that the bank had with business objectives, right? And I remember there was a seasoned executive there who had worked for some really large banks, and it was towards the end of his career and had settled in the community banking. And he, we were discussing something, and he asked about doing something, and in the conversation, he said, you're unlike any other tech person I've ever worked with. He said, you never say no. And I said, well, I don't say yes to everything. And he said, well, that's not what I mean. You don't say no. He said, most operations people, most technical people, compliance people, he said, when we ask for something, when we ask for some capability, or could we do this, could we do that, almost immediately the response is no. Um, and he said, you always ask for more information. He said, even if you know the answer is no, we can't do what I just asked for, or that there maybe that's not a good technical idea, or there's a regulatory issue there. He said, you always ask for more information. He said, you always try to get to what's the objective that's driving our request. He said, and then you try to come up with something that gets us close to what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I think I realized in Leeanne that I had this tendency to always look at things as a business owner looks at them, and I think operations always has this. And again, IT is part of operations. Always has this a slightly different view, and they're not necessarily business people, right? They have a different view on things, and they don't really get that. Technology is not necessarily the solution, right? That you don't necessarily need a tool to do this. What is it we're really trying to accomplish here, and is there another way to do this? It might be technology might be the path to go, but it might not be the path to go. And I just at that point started to think about the whole technology stack in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it goes back to your problem-solving nature as well. And then, I mean, there's a customer service element though as well, and I think it's tied to innovation. All of that. Not saying no, not because you know the answer to everything, and not because you don't know, which is okay to admit, but saying, hey, well, I'm going to figure out a way to solve your problem, and might not have the answer now, but that doesn't mean there isn't a problem, and I'm willing to do what it takes to solve it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just touched on something there about being willing to say you don't know, and you hinted at that, and I that's something you see with a lot of consultants, and that's something we have to coach consultants on continuously, especially people that are new to consulting. They suddenly think because they're a consultant they have to have all the answers, and it's like nobody knows all the answers, right? So it's okay to tell a client I don't know the answer to that, but there's a lot of people here, and someone probably knows the answer to this, or has an idea about it, or we can figure it out, or we will find you a person who does have an answer to that. So we're willing to do that research with our clients and say, we'll track this down for you, and
right.
come up with an answer, right? We might have to invent something, or we might have to try to find a different way to approach this, but there's probably an answer, at least to get you close to what you're trying to do. And I think that kind of goes back to focusing on that strategic objective more than just here's a fix.
Yeah. You mentioned that you fell into banking on accident. So how did your experiences in financial services, tell us a little bit about that, and how these experiences shape your philosophy of strategy before tools.
Right. So my first experience with technology was running mainframes for ADP. Now, while I was running mainframes for ADP, I was actually attending art school. My original intention was to teach fine art, teach painting at the college level. And I'm not a bad painter, but if I was a great painter, we wouldn't be talking right now. So I, in the process of doing that, over the years, I owned a couple of businesses, and I always kept kind of gravitating back to technology for some reason. And one of the businesses we owned, we had computers, needed work done, needed databases, and I got tired of turning to people to fix things who didn't really fix them. They would fix one thing and there'd be another problem. And again, I don't want to be mean to technical people, but sometimes they technical people love to fix things, okay, but they don't necessarily equate that to what the real objective here is. And so I eventually got kind of frustrated and started fixing things myself, because I said it couldn't be that hard. I'll figure it out, right? And so I bought the books, I read it, I figured it out, and ended up teaching. Oddly enough, I eventually started teaching people to get their A+ certifications with a not-for-profit, and kind of running their network and writing database applications for them. And then from there, I went to banking. I thought I needed to go back to a more corporate environment. And I got a job at a bank running data processing. Now, they picked me to run data processing because they saw that I ran mainframes for ADP and said, well, knows how to run mainframes. Of course, it wasn't the same mainframe that ADP used. One with the banks was using Unisys, the ADP used IBM's, so it was a little bit different. But again, it was just solving problems, right? So I went and started as that, and then took over IT. All of IT got data processing back as part of that, and eventually became their CIO. Then eventually became the COO for that bank. And when the CEO of the bank made me the COO, I'd been to a Gartner conference and came back, and he called me and said, "Well, I guess you saw the emails that were flying around last week." And I said, "Yeah, it looks like you made some changes while I was away." He said, "Yeah," and he kind of walked through some of those with me in more detail. And he said, "Now, you probably noticed there's nobody over such and such." And I said, "Yeah, I figured that out. Are you bringing in somebody?" He said, "No, Steve, I'd like you to take that." And I said, "Well, whatever you want me to do, I'll do the best I can. But you realize I never worked at a branch. I never ran loan operations. So putting me over all these operations groups, I don't think I really know what to, I don't know how to do those jobs." And he said, "You don't have to worry about doing those jobs." He said, "You make good business decisions." He said, "We have people who know how to run those areas." He said, "What I need you to do is what you did with technology. I need you to make the back end of the bank work with the front end of the bank." He said, "And get them to stop saying no to everything."
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it
There's that same
came full
philosophy
circuit.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of came
Yeah.
full
Yeah.
circle there. So, so I, like I said, did not intend to go into banking, but ended up there, and didn't actually intend to go into technology. I'm not really a techie type person. People say usually that meet me and say, "Oh, well, he must have a degree in computer technology or computer science, or maybe he's got an MBA." And say, "Nope, nope. I studied painting. I just happen to understand business very well, and I'm good at business, and I understand technology very well. It's just something I can do, right?" And I think that realization that which I think so many businesses miss, that you really have got to look at what your business objectives are and be ruthless around those objectives. I think so many times, especially you see this a lot in small and medium-sized business, they 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 have difficulty finding the time to work on the business, and so they are trapped at this other level, right? And they're working in the business all the time. And I tell people a lot of times that, look, I hate to tell you this, you think that the executive team or the board is steering the company, you're probably wrong. Operations is driving your company, and
Right.
usually the tail wags the dog.
Yeah.
Because if you can't get operations, whether it's compliance, whether it's back office operations, accounting, tech, if you can't get those people's buy-in and get them to do whatever it is your objectives that you're trying to pursue, nothing's going to change. They're going to keep doing what they do. And their solution to almost everything is give me another body or give me another tool. And my question always back to the leadership is, well, wait a second, what is it you're actually trying to accomplish here? And is another body or another tool going to actually accomplish that? Why
Right.
would you do that? Does that really could you do that without these things? And I think, most of the time people are so involved in the day-to-day things that they just start piling that all along. One of my associates, one of my partners, he's done a lot of work as a fractional COO. And he said one of the things he has to do all the time when he would go into a business is unwind huge technology stacks that was just draining the company of resources, of money. And things where you say, well, we bought this to do this, but it didn't really integrate with all these others. So we bought these other things to make this integrate with these things, and then this had to be bought to make this talk to this. And in the end, they didn't even use it. So,
Right. Yeah, and it's just very complicated.
yeah,
Right.
and it's exactly
Yeah.
it's very convoluted, very complicated, and so you really have to you have to coach people to say, look, tell me what your real objectives are, and let's figure out what it would take to reach those.
Yeah.
Um,
And I agree with you. I see that all the time in coaching or consulting with clients who come in for marketing. And it's the same thing. It's like maybe they're running ads or they're, doing different things, but they don't actually have like that strategy. They're not really clear on their overall objectives. And like you said, okay, it's like, let's rewind. Let's back it up. Let's figure out, first of all, what's your mission, vision, values? What are you out to accomplish? Who is your target
Right.
audience? What's your value proposition? What is, but when it comes down to what are you wanting to accomplish? And without that overarching goal, then you can't create the strategy to get there and an effective marketing campaign to get there. So,
Yeah, what's kind of funny about that, you just hinted to about it right there, I think, is that the people are usually good at doing whatever it is that they're in the business of doing. Okay, which really means they're actually operationally focused. They're good at running this thing. Okay, the operations side of how do the day-to-day operations of it. The problem is that's really hard if that's the only place you're operating from. It's hard to grow a business just from that perspective, right? And one of the things that we coach people on, even though we're a governance company, governance does tie into this, but even though we are a governance company, one of the things that we find ourselves talking to people often about is that, look, you have to have that mission statement. You have to have that value proposition. You have to have all this, and it has to be relatable. And you have to, it amazes me how many people have these strategic plans that, first of all, are that thick. Yeah, like I don't know how you're going to relate that to anybody and how you can even digest that. And oftentimes, what it is all their supporting documentation, all the research they put in there. It's like, well, you can put that someplace else. We don't. If somebody questions it, we'll pull that out. But what's the things you're trying to really accomplish here? And I can't tell you, and you've probably seen this as well. Is people will come back and they'll have 40 objectives. And it's like, I don't know how you can accomplish that. And how you can even articulate that. And then they say, well, yeah, but these are real important. And this is our secret sauce. And it's like, well, is this really any different than the business down the street that's in this, this company down the street's in the same business as you? I doubt you're doing anything that unique.
And it's hard to focus on 40 different
Yeah,
things.
And how do you focus on 40 different things, right? And how do you tell your employees what you're doing? And this is the crazy thing I hear all the time. Well, the employees don't actually see the strategic plan. Really?
Wow.
So how do they know which direction you're marching?
Right.
If they don't understand what you're doing, then how are you going to get buy-in around doing it, right? And I mentioned earlier that operations oftentimes the steering and running things is because operations has an agenda.
Yeah.
And it doesn't understand what the board and the executive team, what they've set as an agenda and an objective. If you haven't shared that and you can't relate it to them, then they're not going to buy into that because they have no idea what it is anyway, right?
Exactly.
And I think I always try to tell people, look, there's 4 pillars for executive leadership. First one is that ability, and people usually are good at one of these 4, maybe 2. It's hard to get people to do all 4 of them, but the first thing is that strategic vision. Can you come up with a vision? That's relatable, that has a real value proposition that you can convince people that this is worthwhile and you can motivate people to do. Then the second layer is that tactical layer. Can you plan this? Right? Can you actually put together a tactical plan to do this? And then can you execute that plan? And then the last piece, which is, and this is, and oddly enough, even though most people are centered in operations, this is where they fail. Can you operationalize that? So yeah, they've got operations and it's running, it's doing its thing. But anything that they try to bring on new, anything they try to introduce, they can never get to that point where they take that vision, that tactical plan, that execution, and make it where they can replicate it, where they can turn it in, and they can actually change operations.
And why is that? What is stopping them? What's the common thread that you see, and why?
I think the common thread is probably that awareness factor from top to bottom. Why are we doing this? What are we doing, and why are we doing it? Right. So there's awareness around this, and this goes back to governance because this is what governance really is. Governance is about the awareness of what you're doing, what's being done, Transparency is so not only are we aware of what's going on, but are we transparent enough that everybody can see, is this truly what's being done? And then accountability for it. Who's accountable for what here? Right? And can you prove the accountability? So it's one thing to say that, that this you're all aware of what we're doing. It's another thing to be able to say, we're transparent in that, but then actually say, yeah, but can you prove from an accountability standpoint that it's actually happening? And I think people miss that. Like I said, they get wrapped up in that day-to-day operations and they lose sight of that other. So, whenever everybody's looking at something, and this kind of goes back to the idea around the strategy before tools, which it's kind of funny how that came up. That title came up with people. I was having conversations like this with other people, and at one point someone said, and a lot of people told me you should write a book, and I always kind of laughed and I said, well, who would want to read all that? And I didn't think it was that interesting or that unique, really. And then someone pointed out to me, said, there's a theme which you keep saying. I don't even think you realize you're saying it. You keep really, and it turned out I was actually saying they need to set strategy before they start looking at tools. In other words, you should have your strategy before your operations, and everything should align with that strategy, should align with those objectives. But back to your other question there, I think what happens, Leanne, is people miss that connection. They have that other agenda that's driving things, and they get wrapped up in that, and they don't really see what the true objective is. And when it comes to setting those objectives, I always tell people, look, you got to pick out things that are meaningful, that are actionable, that are impactful, and lastly, that you're actually willing to do.
Yeah. And it seems so simple, yet it's, people aren't successful at it, which is interesting. And so tell me a little.
We really do, right? And if we, and you think, a lot of times, people gravitate, especially in leadership, you see this all the time. They gravitate because they're good at something. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're good at business. They're good at that operational task, right? And a lot of times in business, you see people that are whoever makes the most money rises to the top, right? So we'll use community banking as an example. Most of the executive team is made up of people that came out of commercial lending, because commercial real estate is the cash cow for community banks. So most of the people that are in leadership positions, that's where they came from. Now the CFO probably didn't come from there, but probably if they have a chief compliance officer, but oftentimes the chief compliance officer, even though it says chief, they're not really an executive. They're not really on the executive team, right? And to throw the CIOs and the CTOs of the world. And again, we're talking about small and medium-sized business. We're not talking about enterprise here.
Yeah.
The poor man or woman who has risen to the point of CIO or CTO oftentimes finds themselves in a very lonely position, especially in community banking. Everybody else sitting around the table came from some aspect of the bank, came from banking, right? They came up through that. IT people usually come up through the IT ranks. Their backgrounds are usually much more narrow, so they know technology. They don't necessarily know all the other business aspects. And a lot of times they're not even that good at business. They're good at technology, and they have no peers among their other executives, because the other executives don't understand technology. The CIO, CTO doesn't necessarily understand banking sometimes.
Yeah.
So who are they going to turn to? Right? They're kind of alone. Right? And,
I see that.
Yeah, and I think it would probably have to be, that's probably true for marketing professionals as well. That you understand the concepts, but of marketing and all, but most of the people you're talking to really don't get that, right? So they don't necessarily understand what you're trying to convey to them, I would think.
Right. Yeah. The CMO position, for example.
Yeah,
right?
and that's a tough position to be in.
So tell me a little bit more about your book, Strategy Before Tools, because here you are reflecting a powerful mindset shift. Tell me more about what inspired you to write it.
Uh, well, again, people kept telling me I should.
Yeah. And I was thinking, well, you didn't intend to be go into IT or in banking. Did you intend to be a writer? Was this something that saw
Not particularly,
for
but
yourself?
turns out I started out writing lots of guidance documents.
Okay.
And I have a friend who's written a couple of bestsellers, business books, and the he had at one point said, "Why don't you write a book?" And I was like, "I don't think anybody would want to read that." And he said, "Show me." He said, "I know you've written all these guidance documents. Show me some of the things." And so I kind of gave him the catalog of all the different things. He said, "See, there's probably 2 books here." But again, guidance documents around, especially around IT regulatory environment, is not very exciting, interesting reading.
Yeah.
A lot of times we write that just in case the client wants to see why it is that that we're suggesting something be done. And it's like, well, here's the thought behind this. If you want to understand it, here it all is. If you want us just to get this done for you, then we'll get it done. So people could tell me to do that, and after enough people told me, I guess I'm a little slow on the pickup there. I finally decided, maybe this is a good idea to actually write this. Maybe there is something here that people want to hear. I think a lot of times people in business, again, everybody ends up usually in their position because they were good at whatever position, that area that they were working in, right? Mm-hmm. So CFOs generally come out of accounting, right? You're not going to grow up in marketing and suddenly become the CFO. That would be kind of odd, right? It's just like if you came out of accounting, you're probably not going to become the CMO. So people have, usually most people have a fairly narrow view of the world, if I can put it that way. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just human nature. Everybody has their own door perception that they look through, and it's really hard for everybody to see other people's perspectives and the broader picture of things. That's something that I've always kind of been not an expert at doing, I don't think, but I've been able to put myself in other people's positions and kind of see the broader picture of things. And I think that it's beneficial for people to kind of see things that way. And then the other thing, which I'm just really passionate about, is that I think people waste a lot of money on technology. Okay, I think people overspend on technology all the time. I think technology is great when it works. It just doesn't work half the time, right?
Yeah. So what do you see as some of the most common mistakes leaders make when it comes to IT investments in technology?
Well, I think I'll tell you something the CEOs say to me all the time. And they're always trying to be supportive of their people, right? So they're trying to say this as diplomatically as they can, but they'll say, I think my provider, I think my partner, I think my team is good, but we don't know. We need a sanity check. We need somebody unbiased, somebody that's not drinking our Kool-Aid, somebody who's not in the middle of this to kind of take a look at things. And the first type of consulting I actually did was that type of consulting, was to come in and look at things and say, yeah, here's what really works. This is what not works. This is not working. This is some things you're not really considering that you maybe should consider, et cetera. Okay. And also, doing a little bit of calling balls and strikes there. So what I think people are missing, Leanne, I'm going around the barn a long way here. I need to get your answers for you. Sorry.
That's okay.
That's my nature. I think what those leaders were saying to me is, it's a black box. We don't understand it. And the people giving us the information, we're not sure what they're actually saying. Okay. And something I kind of realized, that ITGC, my company, we don't sell technology. We sell guidance. Okay. We're very good at what we do. But we don't care where you buy your technology. And the reality is, and this is I think the root of a lot of the problems, is that business leaders whether it's, there's just, a senior vice president, an executive vice president, or the president of the company, the CEO, or the board. Everyone that they're talking to about technology usually has some type of bias.
Right.
Okay. They're either trying to sell you a technology, okay, or they're trying to sell you a service on technology, or they're trying to get to acquire another tool because they think that it will make their job, their area run smoother or be easier to do. Right. And operations people, which again, technology is part of operations. People say, "Oh, well, the technology changes so much; those people must love change." It's like, no, they don't. Like, people
Right. They
actually
don't.
don't like change. Nobody really likes change. Most people are just averse to change, right?
Yeah.
But for technology, in technology, a lot of times, technology's job is housekeeping. Really, it's keeping the lights on. So when people look for innovation out of technology, unless it's enterprise, most of the time it's like, nah, they're busy keeping the lights on. This stuff doesn't work all the time. It just breaks more than you would think, right? And so they're in the background trying to keep that running. So when you look at managed services providers, they're not always managing things as much as they are simply fixing everything that keeps breaking. Okay? And that's not trying to throw rocks at them. It's just, sometimes it's like, that's just the nature of is what's being done, right? They would like to manage it more, but actually proactively managing things, whether it's on an inside team or an outside team, is costly.
Right.
So most people default to, well, just break it when it breaks, fix it.
But
right?
put a Band-Aid on it for now.
Yeah, put a Band-Aid on it, fix it.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I can't really afford to do all the prescribed maintenance in this car, but we'll at least keep the oil changed. And if it breaks down, we'll get it to the shop.
Yeah.
Okay. All the other stuff, maybe we can, maybe we can't. Right. And so I think business leaders are kind of trapped in that. So what they were kind of looking for there is that we need somebody to tell us outside. And, we've had some over the years, I've worked with some larger institutions that actually had people that kind of did whatever the team I was leading did. Okay. And but they still hired us. Okay. And when asked why, the comment was always, well, a lot of the things you guys do, we're big enough. We have people that do that on the payroll. But what we don't have is somebody with an outside view, with that different perspective.
Yeah.
And you guys sitting in all of our meetings, sometimes you don't say anything, but every month or so, y'all say something, and this is their quote, not my words. Every once in a while, y'all say something that's absolutely brilliant. And the reason I think that they thought it was brilliant is because it didn't occur to any of them. And they'll say that if we hadn't have heard that, we would have wasted tens of thousands of dollars following something that really wasn't going to work, or that was going to have to be redone because we didn't take this into account, because we were also in the middle of this, that we didn't see the broader picture of it.
Yeah, I can't see the forest for the trees. And I mean, I see that a lot as well. And people are way too close to an issue. It is hard to be objective and to remove themselves and to see the bigger picture because they're too close to it. And there's an emotional aspect to that too, right? And the bias that you spoke about.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got that, and even we have that, but we try to separate ourselves from that and try to keep asking that question, keep stripping it back. What does this mean? What does it mean? What are we actually trying to do here?
Yeah.
You and I, when we talked before this call, we had talked a little bit about AI and people right now everybody's just crazy about it. People can't stop talking about it. But they're treating AI like AI itself as a tool. It's like, no, it's a framework. It's a technology that gets applied to a lot of tools. And what I think the approach a lot of people are taking is, wow, look at what this hammer can do. Look at this hammer. I can tap the nail once and then drive the nail in one shot. And it's like, yeah, that's a framing hammer. That's amazing. Look what it does. Yeah, isn't that cool? Isn't that great? We need one of these. It's like, yeah, but the business objective, what are we actually trying to do here? Well, we're hammering things. It's like, well, wait a second. We're building picture frames. We're not framing houses. That's not our objective here, is to frame houses. We're building frames for prints, for pictures.
Exactly. It's like, how does it align with your business objectives?
This
How
tool
does it
does not align with
your
your objective.
Yeah, right.
And you say, well, we can hang the pictures. It's like, well, with that hammer, you're going to knock holes in the walls. You know, you can't approach it from that perspective. You really have got to strip back to what is it we're really trying to do, and then what would be the best thing to do that with.
Yeah.
And if we're going to have to spend money in technology, does this really accomplish this? And could we do this without this? Period. Right. And I think people are missing that right now.
No, I agree. And can you give us examples of how aligning IT with business strategy has transformed outcomes for an organization? Can you give examples of that?
Well, we've kind of already talked a little bit about it. To give a specific example, I think again it goes directly back to how you're approaching technology and how you're thinking about it. Okay, which again, governance is a lot about that. It's that, do you have that transparency? Do you have that accountability of it? Do you have that awareness of what's going on here? And I think one of the ways we've seen this is working with people to get them to understand. It's like, you bought all of this, you're really trying to do this, and you're not getting anywhere near the mark on this. In fact, if we stripped all this away, if we got rid of all this XYZ technology, will we be further away from the objective than we are right now? And a lot of times people don't ever stop and think about it that way, right? They don't think about that. And I'll give you an odd example, and this ties back to banking, but it could tie to really any regulated industry. When it comes to audits and exams, and that's something we actually do, is walk people through audits and exams. We say it's like having us sit next to you is like being questioned. Having a lawyer sit next to you while you're being questioned. We're going to either answer for you or tell you this is how you should answer this. Now, we don't believe in. We're not going to tell you to lie to an auditor or an examiner. That would be unethical, of course. But we do think you have to control the conversation, because someone's going to control it. And if you let them control it, then you'll end up in a different place than you thought you were going to end up. And I think something people miss all the time, and you'll see in a second my connection here. The people forget that auditors work for them. You hire the auditor.
Yeah. They're
working for you to provide a service. Okay. Auditors always think that they have to find something, or they not doing their job. So they have to write up something. And it's like, no, I didn't want to ask you to do. I asked you to audit against a standard and tell us how close we're coming to the standard. That's really what I want you to do. And the examiners they're measuring against the standard as well. Now, the way business works is usually regulations are written broadly. So in banking, for example, there's not one set of regulations for Bank of America and another set for a $30 million de novo startup bank.
Right.
There's one handbook for what for information security handbook. There's one handbook for both. Okay. Now it will say in that handbook, which makes it very subjective, right? And it'll say in there that depending on the bank's size, scope, and complexity, which tells you there's your wiggle room, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to those examiners, people think, well, they're here to help us. And it's like, I've gone through hundreds and hundreds of audits and exams. I don't think they're necessarily there to help you. Now, there might be some examiners who hear this and get really upset. Okay, but I think this is the nature of this. Examiners, regulatory bodies, don't care about the business you're in. That's not their mandate. Their mandate is to protect something else. So in banking, the mandate of the regulators is to protect the depositors. That's who they're protecting. They're not protecting the bank. The only interest in protecting the bank is in protecting the banking system itself. Right? They don't even care if you're profitable. Let's qualify that. They want you to be profitable enough so that you don't create a risk for the depositors or the system. So they want you to at least be that profitable. Okay. But beyond that, they don't care. That's
Yeah.
not their business. It's not their mandate, right? And so what does that dynamic set up? So on the auditor side, you have people who think that they have to find things to demonstrate their value. Okay. And I'm sure there's some auditors out there who say, no, that's not what we do. And that's not really our approach. But you haven't gone through hundreds and hundreds of them. That's generally what's happening. Okay. And on the examiner side, they're really out for something else. They're not there to protect you. They're there to protect the system or protect the depositors. And then at the individual level, at the human level of this, you have, again, bias comes in. You have people who have pet peeves about things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the disposition of most businesses, simply because they don't deal with this all the time. They don't pick up poisonous snakes all the time, so they don't know how to do that or how to approach it. They're not accustomed to handling that type of thing. Is whatever comes out of the mouth of the auditor or the examiner, the bank says, how high should we jump? So if they say do something, they do it. Add more technology. Add another layer of security. Without stopping to say, well, wait a second, what does the regulation actually say we have to do? What's the real risk here? Are we comfortable with that risk?
Yeah.
Do we even understand what our risk appetite and risk tolerance is? Are we willing to accept this much risk? And because there's lots of ways you can still be compliant without having to do everything that they say to do. I'll give you an easy illustration. So let's say we have a door, and we just say, hey, that door can't be seen. It's to your house, Leanne. That door can't be seen from the road. It's only got a deadbolt and a doorknob lock on it. There's a security risk here. Anybody could walk up to that door, and there's not enough layers there. We need to put 2 more deadbolts on that, put more layers of security. You hear security vendors talk about this all the time, more layers. You'll hear auditors, examiners, you need more layers of this. And I'm not opposed to layers, okay? But again, you have to really think about what the real objective is here and what you're trying to achieve, and is this the best way to achieve it? So let's say we do put on 2 more deadbolts.
Yep.
Okay? What did we accomplish? Well, first of all, I guarantee we spent more money. We also created a lot more friction for anybody who has to use that door.
That's true.
Okay? So that friction could either be for our employees or it could be for our customers. Okay? Now, let's consider the door itself and consider the security risk here. Turns out the top half of the door is glass. Are 2 more bolts, 2 more locks going to really secure that door anymore? The real vulnerability is the glass. We didn't do anything about that. Okay. So again, I think, where people are missing and where it can make a difference is if you really start stripping away and asking those type of questions. What is you really trying to accomplish here? Would this technology actually do that or not do that? Is there another way to do this without technology? Right?
Right.
And
yeah, that's right. And we talked a little bit about AI. And the rapid technology. I mean, it's advancing at such a rapid pace, and I mean, it's impossible to keep up, and it's very costly, right? So, how do you advise leaders to balance innovation with governance in that situation?
Well, again, governance is not a roadblock. Now, I think in business, friction is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, having a little bit of friction in things keeps us from, without friction, you can't keep the car on the road, right?
Yeah,
right. So you have to have a little bit of friction to keep things under control. But governance is not a roadblock. Governance actually reveals things and helps you get, helps keep things above board and helps you get to solutions faster than not having any governance. Without that governance, without that transparency, without that awareness, you really don't have a clear idea of what's really happening, right? So when it comes to innovation, where that governance comes in is putting some frameworks around what we're actually going to do, right? AI is going to be unavoidable. Okay? The genie is out of the bottle. You cannot avoid it. I think there's some serious risk around AI. There's serious threats. We're going to start seeing a proliferation of different types of cyber attacks. And in fact, they're even talking about AI coming up with its own cyber attacks. So it's going to they're going to use AI to think of ways to attack us that no human has ever thought of before. And simply because it can see things faster and look at more data points than any human could ever possibly do at a rate that we just can't ever match on human terms.
Yeah.
So for innovating, and we actually have an advisory program just centered just around this. The first thing I tell people to do is like, well, first of all, you do need a committee. Now people say, well, why do you have to start with the committee? It's like, well, because if you don't start with some type of framework, some type of group that's going to drive this, then it's all over the place. How do you know what's going on? People can be doing anything. And the biggest shadow IT right now is AI. People are using it all to do all kinds of things, right? And that the business doesn't even realize it's happening. Okay, so I'm not opposed to using it. I just think you have to have some controls around it, right? So first of all, I tell people, it's like, look, let's form an AI committee. It could be a subcommittee of IT steering. We'll write a charter for it to decide exactly what it's mandated, what it's going to do. Okay, so what's the accountability to do? What's it going to be accountable for? We're going to be transparent about it, right? And we're going to give everybody the awareness that this is what we're doing. Then let's talk about a strategy. And the strategy is what does the institution, the business, want to accomplish with AI? That doesn't mean what we're going to accomplish. What would we like to accomplish? What type of things would we like to be able to do? Okay, so it's not your business strategy. It's a strategy around how you think you're going to leverage AI. Once that's done, then we need to have a policy of how we're going to apply whatever it is we come up with. I tell people right now they should have an AI acceptable use policy that's separate from your regular acceptable use policy. And the reason I say that is because it's so specialized. It's such a threat at this point. You really need to draw it out separately to make people totally aware, and it doesn't just get folded. Now, eventually, it's going to get folded in everything else. Eventually, it'll collapse into the regular IT steering committee. You won't need the subcommittee. You won't need the special AI. You're still going to need probably a policy around AI, but it's all going to fall into your regular committees, your regular functions. But what they really need to do is approach it that way and start saying, well, what is it that we want to accomplish that we think this could actually help with, right? Mm-hmm. And I usually tell people that one of the first things to look at is look at automation intelligence first. What things can we use AI to automate? But if they're going to do that, if they're going to adopt AI, at one level, AI it's a force multiplier. Okay, but the question is like, well, do we really need to multiply that force? Do I need to be able to strike this nail hard? Do I need to be able to hit this harder, or is what we're doing right now sufficient? If it's a force multiplier and that we're going to be able to do more with less, are we willing to do it with less? And what I mean by that is you see this all the time. I'll pick on operations. I've seen this happen so many times. Sales will come up and say, and we're going to stick with banking. We'll use banking as an example, though this can happen in any industry. But they'll say we're going to double mortgage sales next year. We're going to sell more mortgages next year than we did this year, double the volume. So they turn around to loan operations and tell the operations manager this, and the first thing out of their mouth is, "We're swamped. Can't possibly do that with the staff we have. I need double the staff to keep. If you're going to double mortgage volume, I need double the processors." But that sounds bad enough, right? But you say, well, we're going to have more business, so that's okay because we're already making margin. It's just the cost of doing business. But I can't do that after you get the mortgages. If you're going to get the mortgages is about speed. Not about rate. Rate's a shiny object that gets people's attention. Selling mortgages is about speed. How quick can you close the house, right? So if you're going to do that, I need those new bodies now. So you got to front load the expense.
Right.
I got to train these loan processors so they're ready to handle all this new business you're going to bring in. So let's say we're a small bank. We have 4 processors. We now have 8. A year goes by. Sales is always overly optimistic. Right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, it doesn't matter what marketing sets up for them. The sales thinks they're going to, we're going to hit grand slams every time up the bat.
Yeah.
And you need them to be optimistic, right? If they weren't optimistic, I really wouldn't want them around.
Good
so
point.
They need to be optimistic. But they also need to be realistic, and it's management, especially leadership's responsibility to realize it's like, this is what they're saying they're going to hit. This is probably the reality of this, okay? But let's say we only did half of what we said we were going to do, okay? So you go back to loan operations and say, hey, you know what? We only hit half. We had an increase, but we only hit half that number. I need you to peel back 2 employees. Can't possibly do that. We're swamped, and then. Human nature, the nature of operations is they will fill up their day with whatever it is they have to do. And that becomes the workload.
Yep.
Ask me to do more, can't possibly do that. I'm at capacity. Ask me to do with less, can't possibly do that. I won't have enough bodies.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you do that? So what I'm telling you is this, is if you're going to adopt automation intelligence, you're going to adopt AI, and you're going to use this as a real force multiplier, you either have to do 2 things. You either have to say, okay, we're going to do this, which will allow us to scale, and scale is the biggest challenge for all businesses, especially small businesses. Scale is everything.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to attain that scale, right? Scale works against you all the time. So if we're going to do that and use that to grow, then we got to be willing to say we're going to do that, and we're not going to put on more people. We're going to rely on this. And if we put on more people, it's going to be at the workload that needed to make up for what this doesn't do, right? But if we're going to do this as a way to control what our current volumes are, we're not expecting to increase productivity. We're just trying to get more efficient. Then you got to be willing to do that efficiency. You got to be willing to say, look, either we don't need as many people here. And I'm not advocating that we start firing people, but I think that's going to be a big result of AI. Is a lot of people are going to find themselves with not much to do.
Yeah,
it's an unfortunate thing that's going to happen. I'm not sure how business and society is going to deal with that, but I think it's a real threat. But if we're going to do that from a business standpoint, then and we're doing it so that we can scale. Then you are doing it so that we say, look, our margins are out of whack, or we're not efficient. They're not efficient enough. Our return on the asset is not great enough. We have to do this in order to control headcount. Then you got to be willing to either move those people to other positions that would be more productive, or eliminate those positions. Mm-hmm. Okay, and most people aren't willing to do that. So, if our business was digging trenches and we had 20 laborers out there digging ditches, and we suddenly decide we're going to buy a backhoe, we only need 2 people to operate it, and it can dig in a day 10 times what these 20 people could do. What happens half the time is you look out there and what do you see? You see one guy operating the backhoe, one guy standing there waiting in case he can't do it, and 18 people standing around doing God knows what. Because nobody was willing.
And why? Why do you think that is?
Because I think deep down inside, most of us are nice people, and we don't want to put people out of a job. We don't want to do that. But then at the same time, I think the flip side of that is I think there are lots of us in business and in society who don't want to do any more than what we're currently doing. This is what laziness, I do. I don't want to have to learn something else. I don't want to do something else. Yeah. I just want to keep doing this. So as long as you'll let me stick around here and do this, I'll keep doing it.
Okay. And do you think that comes from laziness, or just a resistance to change, or just
Well, I hate to say laziness. I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to come off you. I don't want people to watch this podcast and say, "Did you see Leanne's podcast? God, they had an ogre on there." This guy was the meanest person I've ever seen. I hate to work for him.
Yeah, I think, but when it comes down to it, you hear of there's a philosophy that people are inherently lazy, and we create things, and innovation largely comes from us not wanting to do certain things, and maybe it's not always necessarily laziness in a bad way, but it's so. We can have more leisure time when it comes down to it. So we can do other things. So we can.
Well, yeah. Well, but I don't think that's real laziness.
No. Yeah. Maybe that's not the right word.
Yeah. Usually when I hear laziness, I think of sloth. Okay.
Yeah. Sloth. finding ways to, I guess it comes down to, we'll say efficiency then, being more,
Right.
well,
So here's why I think that happens. What people do. I think no one likes change, and I can't remember if I wrote an article about this or if I've just talked about you. Yeah, I read so much. Sometimes people say to me, "Well, how'd you come up with that?" And I say, "Well, I don't know if that's original. You don't need to attribute it to me because I may have read that, but I just can't remember where I read it."
yeah, yeah.
If you continually consume lots and lots of information, it's pretty soon it gets to where you can't remember where different
Where it
ideas
came
came
from.
from.
Yeah. I
Um,
get that too. That
yeah,
happens
so
too.
I'm always
Yeah.
reluctant to say, well, I don't know if that's necessarily me. That might be somebody else, but you can attribute me to repeating it, but don't necessarily stay hanging on that it's my concept. I think here's the problem we're all facing. Um, Most people's identity is tied up in what they do. Their self-worth is tied up in what they do, right? So when you take jobs away from people, when you lay people off, that psychological impact isn't just to they have to go find another job or it is you really have and I'm not saying this is partially unavoidable, I guess, but you've really impacted their view of themselves and their self-worth at some level at least. Okay, because most people identify with who they are. A lot of who you are is wrapped up in what you do,
Yeah.
right? So if you're a bricklayer, then that the value of what you're doing, that you're delivering by building things with bricks, that's a big part of your identity of who you are and what your worth is. Okay, and so everybody's job, regardless of what that job is, if you're retired and you say, well, I'm retired and I spend lots of time with my grandkids and I do lots of community service and work with my church. That now has become your focus and your worth. Take that away from you, and people start to question what value do they have.
Yeah. And it's a
Right.
sense of security thing, I think, too. And so when new innovation comes out, or like AI, that is probably going to end up replacing a lot of jobs to some, or changing jobs to some extent.
Right.
I think that uncertainty, um, and right, it causes fear because people are used to doing what they're doing, and it's threatening because they don't know. Now it's like, what are they going to do? What will what is their value, like you were
Hmm.
saying,
Yeah.
look like now? What does that mean for them? How are they going to add value to the society and make an income?
Yeah, exactly. What do I do? What do I do now? So, a
Yeah.
lot of times people are reluctant to change because now you change what I do, that could threaten my self-worth, right?
And especially when they've made a large investment of time doing, what they've done in their career, or, invested in education that may now be irrelevant. And
Mhm.
so, right, that's, I mean, can be depressing as well. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's the right
Yeah.
word too, but it's like, okay, well, what do I do now? I've invested my entire career and many years and in
Mhm.
education in doing what I do, and now it's being replaced by AI. So what does that mean for me? What do I do? Am I going to have to invest a whole lot more? And
Yeah. And do I
right.
have the energy and the resources to make that investment? Right.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. And what
you
direction do I even go in? So,
right. And
right,
so
that makes
the
sense.
Industrial Revolution
Yeah.
took away muscle labor.
Hmm.
Right. It wasn't that we did not need any more muscle labor, but we didn't need it like we did. Right.
That's right.
A lot of jobs went away, and you say, well, new jobs were invented. It's like, well, yeah, they were. I don't think as many new jobs are going to be invented because of AI. Um, because and the reason is because what it's really taken away, it's not going to necessarily take away, at least not in the beginning, it's not going to take away the really high level uh, knowledge muscle, which is the economy of the world runs right now on knowledge, right?
Yeah.
It's the intellect. Um, but the lower level of that, the labor level of that, the repetitive task part of that, it's going to eliminate that. And I don't see any way to stop that. Right? It's driven by profit motivation. The governments are going to drive it. No one's going to no one's willing to walk away from this thing. Okay,
Hmm.
so I
Hmm.
think it's there. So I think you cannot ignore it. Okay, but at the same time, you've got to be aware of the risk, got to be aware of what it might do to your workforce. Um, and you've got to be aware of, again, what you have to have that transparency, that awareness, that accountability around it, or else you don't really know what you might be getting yourself into and what it might be doing. Um, so,
Yeah.
I think that's what people need to start doing. And then the other thing for small business, is realizing that you're probably, and this is something I tell to clients all the time, you should be a consumer of technology, not a maker of technology. Okay. And what I mean by that is that, um, there was a time, if you were in business, you're in some type of manufacturing, where you built your own power plant. You built the factory next to a river because it was a source of power, and you put in the mechanisms, and you ran. You actually, you weren't paying a bill to somebody else that was giving you that power. You paid for all the tools, all the machinery that generated that power to power your factory. Okay,
Right.
nobody does that anymore. You just hook
True.
up to the grid, right?
Yeah,
And
that's true.
and so there was a time with technology when companies had all kinds of custom programs, built other things. Now you saw a little bit of that, I think, kind of reemerge. People were writing all kinds of apps and things like that, and it's like,
Hmm.
well, okay,
Hmm.
that's fine. The problem I see with that is like, you might just end up with a proliferation of things that don't necessarily work, and who's really going to keep that running for you?
Yes. Yeah.
And what security risks are there that you maybe don't even know exist,
Right.
right?
Well,
So
we
I
ran
think
into that,
we
yeah,
need to go ahead.
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, with website development, over the years, I found the same thing. I mean, it used to be that we were coding a lot of very custom websites, but now with or content management systems that are constantly being supported and updated, and they have plugins that you can purchase that are being um, updated and supported on a regular basis, that in a lot of cases it's better, instead of having a completely custom site built, that it's a lot more expensive, and then maintenance of it and the security down the road is going to take a lot
Mhm.
more to update and more costly to maintain. Using programs that are already out there and finding
Right.
solutions and plugins that already exist that are already being supported, and it minimizes the need to rebuild, and it less there reduces security risks and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
you're gonna with AI. I think you're gonna get to a point where you'll open up a program and you won't even type. You'll just start talking to it
Yeah.
to say, "I need a website that's like this," and you say, "Well, here's some examples of scopes of work that we do. Here's some things that we've written. Here's what our logo looks like. Build us a website that would promote this," and it's going to simply create it on the fly for you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And you say, well, what about people that write websites? It's like, well, once upon a time, I made websites for people. Don't do that anymore. I haven't done it for years. Uh, the that will simply go away, right? So I think the next 5 years we're going to see huge changes in everything. I think uh, AI is already starting to write its own code.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a security issue around that. It's like, well, if it can change itself, then who controls what it's changing?
Yeah.
Right? So there's a serious issue around that, right? Um, we're also that though they don't talk about it very much anymore, but I think we're going to see a big change in the next 5 years, probably around digital printing. And if you look at that and say, well, what would be the change there? It's like, well, I tell you what, it's going to change is it's going to change things like you can't imagine. That and like I said, no one's really talking about this right now, but mark my words, it's going to happen. Right now, let's just take automobiles, for example, or anything that's manufactured. When they
Mm-hmm.
manufacture something, they manufacture enough, the parts that they think are going to need to be replaced, that are going to not, that will fail before the whole thing fails, right? Um, they manufacture an extra quantity of those. Okay. So hoses, but whatever it is. Okay. So when you make something like that, what is that really? That's a repository. That's capital.
Yeah.
Somebody's money is in that thing, that whatever that thing was. It's something, their that capital is tied up in that thing. Now, where are you going to put it? Well, it's going to have to be stored someplace.
Mm-hmm.
Well, stored in a warehouse. Well, What's the warehouse? The warehouse is capital as well. The shelving, probably climate control.
Yeah,
There's money.
all the overhead that goes into
All of
it.
this. It's
Yeah.
tied into capital, right? And it's sitting there on the shelf waiting for somebody to put it to use so we can at least get the money out of it. Now, the longer it sits there, the less valuable that money that went into it is.
Right.
Right? So what happens when instead of saying, well, we don't actually need to make 10,000 extra of these, we just need to be able to produce one of these on demand. So instead of a big factory that has a whole bunch of parts in it, big warehouse, excuse me, that has a whole bunch of parts in it, what if it's a smaller building and the only thing in it is a bunch of 3D printers and the materials that they use to print, and whatever's being ordered from the local auto parts store or whatever, they just produce it right there and send it over to the auto parts store. Or maybe if it's small enough, they just produce it in the back of the auto parts store.
Yeah. So now you don't have inventory that's sitting there and
Exactly.
wasting away.
There's a huge financial driver to do that. This technology. The shirt I'm wearing. They can now digitally print almost anything, and this is cotton, but they can make it they can make it feel just like cotton, right? Now, what if I wanted this in blue? Well, I could just download the file and just print it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, well, what is that? Think about all the impact of that type of thing start magnifying that. First of all, it's like, well, we suddenly have a bunch of real estate available because we don't need these giant warehouses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe that can help homeless people. Maybe we can convert those warehouses to a good use, right? But then the other thing is, well, we still have to transport food because it's perishable. We still have to transport the materials that the digital printers are using, but a lot of these other things that these big trucks are running up and down the road with.
Yeah.
Do we need those trucks anymore?
Right. It'll reduce a lot of.
Do we need the people driving those trucks? So what happens if you're a trucker? So I think technology is going to be extremely disruptive in the next 4 or 5 years here. We'll see.
Now you emphasize moving from reactive to proactive IT maintenance. What does that look like in practice for executives?
Again, that goes back to the those three things that transparency, awareness, and accountability. Most of the time, since IT spends most of its working day fixing things that reacting to things that are broke, they don't necessarily do a lot of preventative things. Okay, and the other problem I think you oftentimes see, and this is very true in a small business. So we'll talk a little bit about ITGC here. We'll plug ITGC for just a second. If you hired somebody like me or one of the consultants that work with us, we would be expensive employees. Okay, and people will ask me sometimes, well, Steve, should I hire a CIO? And my reaction normally is like, as I see to them, so this is going to sound extremely biased, but I'm going to tell you no. And it's going to sound like biased because I'm going to tell you to hire us instead. Because here's the reality. Most executives in IT, unless it's a big company, most of the time, they're not really working as an executive. They're working in a more reactionary function and a more operational level, keeping things going. You don't need an executive leader to do that. You need a good IT manager to do that. Maybe a director. Okay? So you're probably not leveraging that executive skill set very often. You're not leveraging that strategic thought very often. So why pay for that all the time? You're better off to have somebody to turn to that you can draw that information from when you need it, than have that on the payroll all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a way of outsourcing that, right? So how does that answer your question? Here's the point I'm trying to make here, is that most people can't become reactive, or can't become proactive that way, because the people that would have to tell the leadership that information, they're too busy keeping the lights on. And they probably don't have enough experience in the other areas to really be providing you good information. Okay, and if you're relying on your tech vendor, your tech service provider, or even your internal team for that, a lot of times, again, that bias starts to creep in.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like you to do this because this would be good for us. This will benefit you, but it's really going to benefit me as well. Right.
Yeah.
So that, there's this other agenda, right? So they're not looking at that as objectively as you really need. So what you have to have, and this is again, scale, right? Big companies who really do need a CIO or a CTO that are at scale, where those people are really focused on strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's enough strategy there and enough objective things to be driven to keep them busy with that. They're making better strides because they're really looking at what the next thing is, and they're also looking at it just from this is down to the housekeeping level. Small businesses all the time end up in these conversations where either their service provider or their IT people walk in and say, "I need to replace this. This is going end of life next week or next month." Oh, how much is that going to cost? $25,000. $25,000.
Yes.
How long have you known this? Oh, I knew it was going to go end of life, but it is what it is. We need $25,000 to replace it.
Yeah.
They weren't thinking like business people. They were just thinking, oh, this is something that's got to be fixed, and I need $25,000 to fix it, right? So
right.
the being proactive is knowing where you are on that lifespan of that technology, what a roadmap really looks like. How much is this technology really costing you? When's it going to have to be replaced? What are our options for replacing it? Mm-hmm. I always tell people when we're working with somebody, and like I said, we work with lots of IT managers, and even for a small company, if they have a CIO, again, a lot of times they're being forced to operate at that operational level, right? So they don't have necessarily the bandwidth or the experience to look at it from those broader levels. But I always tell them, look, you need to know what you're going to be doing for the next 24 months.
Yeah.
Today. Now, that doesn't mean it's exactly what if we look out 18 months, it doesn't mean exactly what we have projected there is exactly what we're going to do 18 months from now. But we have a really good idea that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
Right? And so by the time it gets close to you, gets closer on the horizon, we've already vetted all the options. We've already figured out what it is. So when it comes time to submit a real budget, and half of the time they don't even have a budget, but if we work towards getting them to be proactive and say, look, we've already vetted the options. We've had the discussions. Here's the final cut for this. This is what needs to go into the budget, and here's when it's going to be done. Now you're not reacting to the technology. You're now driving the technology.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
And it's very challenging for small businesses to do that.
So what advice would you give to leaders who feel overwhelmed by the complexity of IT and just want to make confident, smart decisions?
Doesn't have to be us, but find somebody that you can talk to, that you can trust, that will answer the question, who is not trying to sell you something else. Okay.
Right.
And then talk to, I think a lot of times, people get so wrapped up in their own business that they don't talk to their peers. And I like the idea of peer groups. Okay. Mm-hmm. There are CEO groups for banking. There's a couple of, I can't remember the names of it, but there's a couple of companies that kind of specialize in this, and they put especially community banks and credit unions. Of course, credit unions and banks don't like to talk to each other, but they put these CEOs together that are in similar sized banks. Now they don't put somebody if you're a bank in St. Louis, they don't put you with a bank that's necessarily in Jefferson City or Columbia, Missouri, which is real close to St. Louis, right? They don't put you together with them because everybody says, "Oh, I can't talk to somebody that's my direct competitor," but they'll put you with somebody that's 2 or 3 states away from you that you're really not competing with head to head. But it's a similar situation as you, similar size, similar scope, similar challenges, right? And being able to talk to each other, having that peer conversation, that sanity check, right? To say, "Hey, we saw this and we did this. Have you ever had to deal with that?" "Yeah, we did, and we did this." Yeah. "And we tried that. That didn't work for us. Here's the problem we had." That's the thing I think people should seek out. So seek out a trusted advisor, and then seek out peers.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. I think your message is really important. Technology should serve business strategy and not dictate it. For our listeners, how can they find out more about your upcoming book and connect with you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just look up my name and look up ITech Governance Consulting. You can go to itechgovernance.com. That's our website. Check out our blog. We're pretty prolific when it comes to blogging. And if you ever just have a question, and you can see my number and all on LinkedIn, you can just DM me and just say, hey, what do you think about the X, Y, or Z? I'm usually pretty generous about answering most questions. If it gets really involved, and I might tell you it's like, that would take a project, an engagement to actually solve that problem for you. But generally, I answer most questions for people.
And what is your website?
It's itechgovernance.com.
All right. Well, thank you again. Super interesting conversation. We could probably talk for a couple more hours on the subject.
I apologize. I am a verbose individual.
Super interesting.
I'll tell you a quick story. It's funny. And let you wrap up. I was at a conference a few years back, and there was a panel. I'd already done my breakout speeches, and there were presentations, and there was a panel discussion, a bunch of CIOs and CISOs rather. And somebody asked a question, and nobody really had a good answer. It was that wasn't something they dealt with. And one of the guys leading it at the front said, well, if you really want an answer to that, there's a guy standing in the back of the room. His name's Steve Ward. Ask him that, and he will tell you everything you ever wanted to know. If you ask him, but I got to warn you, if you ask him, tomorrow morning the sun will come up and Steve will finish telling you about that. But I guarantee you'll know more about it than you ever dreamt possible.
Yeah, right. Which warrants a book. I mean, it's exactly the reason why you had to write the book, and hopefully there are more to come as well.
We'll see. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. And for our listeners, until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and keep igniting industry. Remember to follow and like us, and stay tuned for more. Thanks again.
Thank you.